Howdy, Tommy from Tanknations here. Welcome to an episode of Tanknations Talk. With me is Chris from Tanknations and Aquarium Service Tech on YouTube. And today, what are we doing?
Today we are talking about quarantine fish, and we're separating fact from fiction.
So really what we're doing here, when we're separating fact from fiction with respect to quarantine, is we're breaking down these barriers that you guys have been putting in front of your quarantining of your livestock. And we're gonna talk about all of these different excuses and misconceptions about quarantine and show you that it's really easy, it's really effective, and it should be the norm in this hobby.
So on this notebook here, I have what we commonly hear people say is the reason they don't quarantine their fish. So starting with, it is unnecessary to QT a fish if it looks healthy. So if you go to the fish store and you're checking out the fish there and they look, they're swimming, they're active, they're brightly colored, they're clear eyes, and you might go as far as asking the store owner to feed the fish and it's eating and all that. Do I need to quarantine fish if they, look healthy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you haven't seen our previous quarantine videos, you should go and watch those. We have a whole playlist. But we show you an example of a failed quarantine in that video with the frostfin cardinals.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Those fish look great. They looked great when they were in anti-parasitic medications, and 3 days out of meds during the 2-week observation period that we do for all our fish, they looked like garbage. They were covered in cysts, probably velvet. They had to restart the treatment. And at these fish stores, they're running anti-parasitics. Any store worth their salt has anti-parasitics in the water, probably copper. So the fish is gonna look good, but it can still be a carrier for those diseases. And if the fish aren't isolated, like how we have here, if they're bringing in new batches of fish, once a week or multiple times a week, that's constant reintroductions of diseases. So even if the fish looks good, you still gotta treat it.
Yeah, I think like every single fish that you see, you have to assume it has something. This one is really frustrating for me because we've had customers in the past that, they went out and got a fish from their local, from an LFS, and it infected their tank and all their fish got sick, and they were like, well, I picked the healthiest looking fish, it was eating, it was swimming around, I don't know what could have happened.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. We're a quarantine shop.
Yeah.
We're all that we tell people is quarantine, quarantine, quarantine.
Yeah, we live by that. That's the whole reason why we did this. But we've seen this happen so frequently, and I've always stressed to anybody I talk to about this hobby, customers, whether you've been in it for a long time or just getting into it, is patience is the key here. It's patience in the reefing hobby. It's make or break. You have to take things slow. So then there's a lot of people that get discouraged because the saltwater hobby already is expensive as it is when you include lights, the tank, the fish, coral, all that stuff. QT is just another thing to spend money on, and it's expensive. It's too expensive. I don't want to do all that. It's too much to get into. I want to have my coral, I want to have my fish, and I'll take my chances.
So there's a couple points there. So let's just touch on the expense.
Yeah.
To start with, you might think that it's expensive to buy a quarantine fish because it does cost a little more than it does from a typical fish store, and it's not much more. I mean, our prices are pretty close in line with Live Aquarius prices, if you want to use that as a reference. Like, that's not more than your average fish store by much, but it's way more expensive to have to break down your tank and set up an impromptu quarantine tank, or to constantly be losing corals and dealing with coral pests because you didn't quarantine your livestock in the first place. Like, quarantine should be the bare minimum, like what we're calling quarantine now, because all that this really means is that you're having a good chance of getting healthy animals.
Right.
These are pets at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I tell the story all the time is when I first got into the hobby, I had like 13 fish or something, and then on my birthday I decided to get the last 2 fish that I wanted to complete my my tank. I got all the fish that I wanted, and I went to my local fish store and I picked out, I think it was an Anthias or something like that, and he looked healthy, he looked good, nothing to being a novice, being somebody who just got in the hobby, that looked weird to me. So I put him in my fish tank, and within probably about 48 hours, my fish started to do really, really bad and show signs of something was wrong. I heard about quarantine, but I never really thought it was too much work, and I thought it would be too expensive and all that stuff. I didn't really want to put the time into it because I just didn't know. I was always hearing it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Well, I ended up losing all my fish because I put that last one in there that was infected. So when it comes to saving money, I just cost myself a bunch of money because I lost all my fish. Instead of just quarantining that one fish and spending a little bit more money on that one fish, I ended up destroying my whole tank.
Yeah, and that, I think this segues really into another one of the points introduced by that, which is that, is it a lot of effort? And yeah, quarantine is more effort than just buying a fish, cutting the bag open, plopping it in your fish tank.
Yeah, plop and drop.
But these are pets at the end of the day. I mean,
Right.
when you lose your whole tank, that's a big emotional loss, and also that really sucks for those animals. So if you could prevent all of that with just a little bit of effort or a little more upfront cost in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't do that with any other animal. You wouldn't do that with, a dog or a cat or even a bird,
No.
But for whatever reason, people think that you can just plop and drop fish and it's just going to work out, or they're not as, their lives aren't as valuable. But we would never, I have a dog at home, and we sometimes will foster, other puppies. And one thing they tell me is to make sure that they are in separate rooms, that they're not crossing the same areas, and it's to protect those animals. Well, I'm not just putting them all in the same cage and just hoping for the best, I never understood people's mentality when it comes to why it's so different for fish tanks than it would be for any other pet.
I think a lot of why fish aren't as respected as other animals is changing now.
Yeah.
Fish like from a food standpoint, like food fish, they're given the least amount of protections of any animal that we eat. And that's starting to change. We're starting to learn things about fish biology, or at least they're starting to be talked about more. People are understanding that fish have nociceptors and probably understand something similar to what we distinguish as pain. I know there's still some debate out there, but we're starting to think of fish as, as more developed animals than we used to.
Well, I think anybody who's really had an aquarium and interacted with it knows that fish are intelligent. I mean, they're like cats. They know when you come up with. Anytime I feed the fish here, they know. They come to the front of the tank. They're moving all around. They're excited. They recognize you. When you're in this hobby, when you have fish, you realize that there's a certain amount of intelligence there, and it's definitely easy to care for them. That's why we get so frustrated. That's part of the reason why we opened up a quarantine shop, because there's nowhere around where we are that does what we do. That quarantines fish. A lot of fish stores around here, and I've worked for one, and I'm sure you've worked for plenty. They do some steps, but it's more about the turn and burn. It's more about get it in and get it out.
Yep, you run anti-parasitics in the fish store, and that makes the fish look good enough to sell.
Right, and that's the whole point, is just to sell it. Yeah. So, with that being said, I have an idea here that I heard when I was first kind of getting into the reefing hobby, and I watch a lot of YouTube, and I came across one of these guys on here who has a rather large following.
Oh.
And he said that...
Don't name drop him.
No, I would never do that.
It's a him, though?
He was saying that if you have a mature reef aquarium, a mature tank, and it's the water chemistry is right, and you have the right balance of whatever in the tank, that there are natural predators to things like marine velvet and other ciliates and parasites, and that if you have a mature tank and it's balanced right, that your fish will not get sick. That basically it'll be self-regulating.
This is that video you sent me, right?
Yeah. And as somebody who's just getting into the hobby, and I just wanted to have that beautiful tank that you see, on YouTube or at the fish store. That was kind of like, you kind of search out the information that kind of
feeds into your own biases.
Your own narrative. Like it's an echo chamber. You want to hear what you already thought, and so I was like, oh, cool. Well, I don't have to quarantine my fish as long as my system is healthy. I'll just make sure my system's healthy as possible, and I'll just put the fish in, and it'll all be good. What is your opinion on that?
It's really frustrating to see, and when watching the video, I don't think that there was anything nefarious behind it.
Right. I truly believe he thought that.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
There's a number of people that do that. People in this industry think that they have 1 or 2 or 3 successful reef tanks, and they think, oh, I cracked the code.
Yeah.
All these other people are, doing whatever they're doing. But having a service company with over 100 customers that we see on a regular basis, some of them with multiple fish tanks.
Yeah.
We feel that, and we also have data to back it, but no 2 tanks are the same.
Absolutely not.
And if you have 10 people set up 10 tanks the exact same way, the exact same products and equipment, they're gonna have different levels of success, and they're gonna function in different ways. That's just the name of this industry. There's a lot of stuff that we don't understand. This idea hurts a lot of people and forces a lot of people out of the hobby.
Yeah.
80% of people enter the hobby and then leave within 2 years. And the number one reason why they're leaving is unexplained fish death and coral death. And if you say to yourself that, oh, if I just do my husbandry, my tank will be fine, it'll deal with any pest that I put in there, and then you send it and you introduce aptasia and flatworms and velvet and uronema and all these terrible pests and disease, your tank is never going to look like that tank of the month beautiful showcase that you want it to be.
Right. You'll never get there because you'll constantly be fighting this battle.
Yep.
And you'll get exhausted. It's similar to telling somebody that has a terminal disease, well, just exercise more or eat a certain food or something like that. Well, I got cancer. I need treatment for that. So that's what always frustrates me, because a lot of these things, just because you have a mature tank doesn't mean that you're not going to have a major issue. You might be okay for the first couple of fish, they might be strong enough to deal with it, but as you add new fish, you might be wondering why those new fish are dying. And then you might only be able to be topped out a certain amount of fish that build up enough immunity to survive whatever parasite or disease that's in the tank. But any new fish you put in there just won't make it and keeps getting sick.
Yep. I was pretty frustrated by that video. Do you think that this is kind of along the same line of when people say that what happens in nature? Like, fish have diseases in nature, so how do they get rid of it in nature? We should just do that in the fish tank. We should have cleaner fish and cleaner
comparing
shrimps
something like the ocean to your little box of water. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point, saying that you're dealing with a huge ocean, and the chance for reinfection is rather slim, and the concentration of parasites that they're probably getting infected with are a lot less than when you're in this little tank, and that parasite only has so many places to go, and the fish only has so many places to get away from it, and it doesn't have as much time to recuperate.
And so then I think a lot of people will turn towards equipment. They'll try and find something that can get rid of the parasites for them, instead of them having to go through the work of doing the quarantine or breaking their whole tank down and treating everyone. So you'll hear a lot of people talk about adding a UV sterilizer to their fish tank.
Yeah.
Which I really hate this myth, and UV sterilizers are sold with, I think, incorrect or at least misleading tank size estimates on them. They'll say, oh, this 9-watt UV will treat a 150-gallon fish tank. And it's like, maybe it'll treat that for the very simple thin algae that grows on your glass and some bacteria in the water column, but that's not going to treat a parasite load. And realistically, if you wanted to keep the parasite loads low, like how they are in the ocean, you would need a UV that you can cycle your entire return pump through and have it be effective for that. That would be a massive UV compared to the size of a fish tank. Like, no one is running UVs that size on their fish tanks.
And then when you're talking about something like a UV sterilizer, that can make the tank run hot, and then you'd have to invest in like a chiller. And then we're back to, well, QT is too expensive. Well, that is too.
Yeah. How about
now you're putting yourself in a position where you're spending money on equipment.
$5,000 UV and chiller to maybe work.
Yeah. Not a good idea.
No. So what's another one? This is fun. Are you enjoying this long form content?
So here's one that I often hear.
He hates it.
Yeah, I hear this a lot on
Chris hates
on the
long-form
YouTubes
content.
and in forums. You have two camps going back and forth, and it is that QT is actually worse for the fish than the actual disease. That's why I said it so, because I knew you were going to get up and go. Is there water in there, or is that vodka? There's vodka in that, guys. Strap on.
All right. So to be fair, I'm gonna pull myself down a little bit. To be fair, even 5 years ago, it was a lot harder to learn about quarantine. And like when I was first learning about it, it was really hard to figure it out. And it was often expensive to figure it out. Like a lot of the info that you needed was behind paywalls, or like Noga's book was hundreds and hundreds of dollars back then. It's a lot easier to quarantine now. It's a lot easier to get that right information.
There's a lot of information out there. There's Humble Fish, who I think is a great source of information. There's tons of forums out there to people exchanging ideas.
Humble Fish Forum.
Humble Fish Forum, yeah. There's people out there exchanging ideas. So the information is a lot more accessible.
Yep. And if you quarantine the right way, if you use the right methods, so we have some data here with our quarantine protocol. The past 2 shipments that we've gotten in, we got a Caribbean shipment, we got an Indo-Pacific shipment. We've lost 1 fish. It was a Midas plenty. Out of over 200 fish that we brought in.
Oh, well over 200.
Out of over 200 fish, we lost 1. And part of that is that we have really good suppliers, so our stress-related mortality is lower. Like from some of the bigger suppliers, you're just going to have higher stress-related mortality. But typically at your normal fish store, you're probably going to have somewhere between the order of 20 to 40, maybe even 50% mortality if you're keeping the fish for as long as we keep the fish.
Yeah.
And we had 1 fish. So quarantine is extremely effective. Like diseases are what kill fish, not the quarantine process.
Right.
If you do it the wrong way.
Well, that's what I think a lot of this is. So some of the chemicals used to quarantine the fish, the coppers, I know the old school way, and some people still do it, is formalin. There's some pretty harsh medications. Where problems arise is when those medications aren't dosed properly, or they're getting bad information and they're overdosing, or they're not dosing enough. I think it becomes a dosing issue. I don't think it's the medications itself. And the other thing to keep in mind is you got to make sure you're kind of doing a bit of a mini cycle on the quarantine tank too. And you got to be careful of ammonia spikes. Make sure you have your ammonia sticker there. Keep an eye on that. Not overloading your quarantine system with too many fish at once or too big a fish. I think where this idea comes from, I think it's more user error than it is the actual quarantine process.
Yep, it's people that tried it. They tried quarantine. Maybe it was a long time ago, or maybe they just recently got bad advice on how to do it.
Yeah, bad information.
Yep. I mean, I was talking to someone about quarantine the other day, and he showed me his quarantine tank, and he was like, "Oh, I don't know why I can't get rid of this disease. He's got sand and rock in the tank."
Right. Yeah.
And he's dosing copper, so the copper is just immediately absorbing into the sand and the rock, and he's not testing it frequently enough. So of course, quarantine isn't working for him.
Yeah.
But if you follow the protocols, go on Humble Fish Forum and just do what he recommends. Like you're following a recipe at this point. It's like you're baking. What do people bake? Chris was a chef too. Like not only is he a good guy,
I wasn't a baker.
You weren't a baker?
I baked, but I wasn't a baker. But yeah, it's like baking.
Dabbled.
It's baking some cake.
Yeah.
Let's bake some
quarantine fish.
Let's bake some fish. Ugh, baked fish is the worst. So there's a recipe to follow.
Yeah, there's a recipe to follow. Sorry, I was thinking of times when I had baked fish. It's not often.
It's not.
It's
I'm not.
better
I'm
pan.
not a. Yeah, I'm not a big fish person.
Salt on the skin side
yeah,
down,
a nice
render
sear
the fat.
on them. I like a nice seared fish. That's me personally. I like a seared fish. Or an encrusted fish. You never had a sweet potato encrusted fish or a coconut macadamia nut encrusted fish.
What about garlic?
Now I'm getting hungry. Oh, speaking of garlic, that brings us to this next, separating. What was it? Fact from fiction?
I think it was fact from fiction.
I think we got off the topic of fact from
Fiction from fact. That's what we're
No,
doing.
but we got off the topic of fact and fiction.
No, that's
this
what
whole
we're
thing was what
doing
you were
here.
saying. All right. So
It doesn't need a narrative.
Speaking of ginger,
Garlic.
John looked over. John's our technician is Ginger we have here. John, come say hi.
Can you say that?
He said, I mean, he popped his head over.
Well, yeah, speaking of ginger, like about
Speaking of ginger,
This is my brother John.
but that's not the ginger I'm talking about. The ginger I'm talking about is the ginger that that they say you can use to treat ick and marine velvet and other diseases. So ginger, garlic, what's another one? Now those are the two that I know are most commonly used. Ginger and garlic
The
are
two
the
biggest ones.
yeah.
I'm sure some people are using paprika and parsley,
Cinnamon, sugar. That you can use garlic and ginger to be able to you pop a couple cloves of garlic, skin some ginger, throw it in there, and it will kill the ick. I can understand where people think this works because they'll see the white spots on the fish. They throw garlic in there, and then as a cyst,
through its normal process.
yeah,
just falls off.
it falls off, and then it stays dormant, and then it swims back up and affects fish. In that period, you think, oh, the garlic worked. It got rid of the cyst. It got rid of the ick.
And then those people are the loudest proponents of it. Meanwhile, we have data. Like people have gone through and done legit science here.
Yeah.
Where
Garlic
there's
doesn't work.
controls, and they show that it doesn't do much of anything for parasites.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of companies that sell garlic products,
Mm-hmm.
and they sell it for like an appetite stimulant.
Yeah, food additive. Yeah.
Which it can work as an appetite stimulant, but if your fish is already eating, then you don't really need to stimulate its appetite. But at the fish store, we would get tons of people that would come in and they'd say, "Oh, my fish are sick, I need garlic." Like they would come
really?
into the fish store and not ask questions. They would just say, "I need garlic, my fish."
Why
are
didn't you go to the grocery store?
sick."
I don't understand why you come to a fish store if you need garlic. Another topic here is, I got the fish from the fish store, right? Oh, okay, so I won't quarantine it, but I know that it could possibly have something, so I'm gonna go and I'm gonna grab this blue stuff, and this green stuff looks pretty cool, and I'm gonna dump it in a 1 gallon container with a little salt water, and I'll just take the fish and I'll just dip it in there.
Mhm.
And I'll give it about 30-minute bath and take it out and pop it back in. And that should get rid of any type of disease or anything that
Yeah,
is on the fish.
I mean, it's usually better than nothing,
Right.
unless maybe sometimes if you get the fish shipped from, like if you don't go to the store and pick it up and it's been in a bag for a while, if you're not competent to do those dips correctly, you don't understand like the correlation between ammonia and pH, ammonium and pH, you could potentially do more harm than good with that, but it's probably better than nothing. It's just not going to be 100% effective ever.
Well, we used to, when we worked at the last fish store together, we used to do formalin baths when the fish came in, and that did help with things like flukes and parasites like that.
But we still had to treat with Prozi after.
Right. So so there was still some that were able to tough it out, and formalin's very dangerous. I don't really like working with it, but any of those baths, there's internal things like uronema that could be inside the fish. That's not going to matter how long you give the fish a bath for.
Yep.
And I personally, even on the same topic of that, not just your green and your blue liquids, and it's also freshwater dips. I don't particularly like freshwater dips.
No, and you guys need to look up hypo dips. Hyposalinity dips are basically just as effective as freshwater dips, and they're way less stress on the fish, and there's so many fewer things that you can do wrong when you're doing the dip. So it takes out a ton of the user error, and it takes out a lot of the stress on the fish. It's super simple.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the freshwater dips. It stresses the fish out way too much, and it seems like a lot of people that do these dips are doing it as like the fish is already showing signs and it's already kind of stressed out, and then you're taking it out and you're giving it a dip and a freshwater dip or whatever chemical, and it just ends up making it that much harder on the fish, stressing the fish out that much more.
And some people do it too, like just prophylactically. They just dip everything before they put it in their tank.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've seen it at other stores where we weren't necessarily doing full quarantine like we are here, and dips are regular, common practice for your typical fish stores when they get a shipment in. But there's still diseases that make it through that, and diseases are probably close to 100% of the time gonna make it through the dip. The dip makes it, the parasite load less, so the fish is gonna probably be healthier over the next couple of days. But you should still be treating so that you're not introducing those diseases into your tank. When it's sold as something that is a disease preventative, that's a lie.
Yeah.
And that feels nefarious to market it in that way. When no one with any credibility in the field of fish quarantine would tell you that dips can be used as a preventative for diseases.
Right.
It's a method of treatment.
Well, it's one step in the long, a list of things you can do. There's also there's some type of medication that's supposed to be reef safe.
Oh,
I forget who make. I know who makes it, but
it's basically just hydrogen peroxide.
And you do a couple of drops in the tank, and again, it's kind of like the garlic ginger thing, where the ick or the the ick or the velvet will drop off, and then people attribute it to this solution that you put in the tank.
Yep.
That's reef safe, so they don't have to take the fish out of they don't have to take the fish out of the aquarium, and they don't have to worry about their corals. And it's supposed to cure ick. It's sold as like this will cure ick or slow it down, and
it's like ick puncher or something like that.
It does not work. It's a waste of $15-20. Don't buy it. To me, that one got me too.
There's no in-tank treatments for ick or velvet or any of these ciliates that aren't going to ruin your tank forever afterwards.
Right.
Like if we could use those here, then we would just use those in our quarantine tanks instead of copper and chloroquine phosphate and metronidazole. And but you can't. Like those things don't exist. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
So, Chris, what do you think about? So many people think that fish disease is uncommon, and there's a lot of people that have their tanks with fish that visually look healthy most of the time, that have carriers. Their fish are carrying some kind of disease, and then when they add new fish, those fish will oftentimes catch the disease, and then in their mind, they always jump to, that new fish that I added must have had a disease. Not that my healthy-looking fish, they couldn't possibly.
So I've been doing this now for 3.5 years, 4 years?
As a profession?
Well, yeah, as a profession. Yeah. So I've been in the hobby for a lot longer, but I've just started doing this as my full-time job about 3.5 years ago. And I worked in a fish store for about a year or something like that, and then we got onto the aquarium service. And before I was in the industry, I didn't think fish disease was that common. I thought it was, you go to a bad fish store, they obviously don't clean their tanks or something like that, and you're gonna get a fish disease. Or that's what I thought.
Yeah,
so
if
the fish store looks clean and everything's wiped down, I won't get a fish disease. This place knows their stuff. They're feeding regularly. Their tanks looks clean. They're spotless. These guys are on their stuff. I don't have to worry about it.
They probably get their stuff from the good sources, not the bad
exactly.
sources.
And then I even was told that we get our stuff from the good distributors. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So I didn't think that fish disease was very common. As I got into it, and as I was when the fish orders would come in, and I was the one that was dealing with them and acclimating everything and doing the dips and doing all that stuff, and then seeing the fish in the tanks for days to weeks, I really started to realize and appreciate just how important quarantine was and is.
It's eye-opening.
I saw the diseases that were coming in on these fish. I've seen a lot of, when I worked at the one fish store, a lot of fish death because diseases weren't fully followed through on. So no, it's very common. To me now, every fish that comes in that we order has a disease. I treat every single fish like it has a disease because most likely it does. And there are, like you hit up before, is there's plenty of people that have tanks with all these fish in it that look beautiful, but they're carriers, or they have an immunity to whatever issue or sickness that's in the tank. But if they do, they can never add that new fish because that new fish keeps on dying. And they might attribute it to aggression or for whatever else, but in actuality, it's because this fish doesn't have the immune system like the fish that are currently in their tank. And
if you haven't watched our other quarantine content, make sure you do that. Playlist is in the description, but we have a video where we talk about how common a particular disease is, gill flukes on angelfish, because this has been pretty intensely studied all across the different oceans, and it's like 95% of angelfish out in the ocean have gill flukes.
And I think that matches up for what we see when we get angelfish in. They always have flukes on them.
Yep. And then when you think about like the transport chain, you know what my eye-opening thing with yours was working in the fish store.
Mm.
For me, it was when I was in college. I was doing some aquarium service. Got an account with some wholesalers down south Florida, and I went and walked through one of them, and I swear I could hear Sarah McLachlan singing that, you know, I probably can't.
Yeah, I'm not
Before
gonna
we
try.
get DMCA'd?
I'm not gonna attempt to. I don't sing good enough to be
No, but you know,
copyrighted.
you know Sarah McLachlan. And I saw like how many of these fish looked rough, and I saw that they had fish that were so full of diseases in the exact same system as other fish that were healthy, other fish that they were bagging up to sell to me.
Yeah.
And when I saw this, I started to realize how big of a problem it was. But even then, I still fell for the, you know, if the fish looks healthy, it's probably going to be fine.
Right.
It wasn't until I really started getting more experience, having more tanks under my belt, seeing the same mistakes happen over and over and over again, that I started to realize this. And that's why we opened up a quarantine shop, full circle. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please hit that subscribe button and that like button if you appreciate what we're doing here. We're trying to share all kinds of knowledge, and we hope that you can help us share this knowledge too, because we feel like this is some of the most important info right now for the hobby.
Yeah.
And the only way that the hobby is going to change, the only way that there's going to be more stores like us opening up, more stores like this in your area, is if you're demanding it. And so share this with other people that have fallen for these common misconceptions and have had issues with their tank, or new hobbyists, so that they don't have to go through the same problems that we've all gone through not quarantining our livestock.
We need to make this the standard in this hobby.
Yeah.
It's just the way it needs to be.
And if you believe that, you know, help us out with a like on this video and, you know, a share. That'd be really appreciated. Go check out Chris's channel, Aquarium Service Tech. It's in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.